We're going to be exploring two different ways of handling buildings in landscape, and you probably won't be able to see my resource too awfully well, and of course I would prefer to work on the spot, but in the first place it doesn't work very well to video, and in the second, I'm not in Maine. So this will be a very simplified one. The camera didn't expose very well on these pictures, and I can't see all that much, and you can't either, I'm sure. I'm using an Esterbrook 9128 vintage ink pen for this one. It's one of my favorites. And I'm going to tilt the paper just slightly so it's more comfortable for me. And we'll pretend that we don't have much time and I have to work fast. Since the shoreline rocks are in the foreground, I'm going to give them more detail by quite a bit. I was fascinated by all these wonderful rock forms. And there's some sort of sea growth, bushes kind of things. Not sure what it is, and I sure can't tell in this photo. So I'm just suggesting the rough textures. Trying not to get my hand in the ink too much. I tend to do that. As you can probably see, this ink pen has a very flexible nib, rather like the Namiki Falcon or the Noodler's Flex pens. I bought it on eBay and it works very well for me. It was relatively inexpensive. So as I say, I'm giving a little bit more detail to the rocks up front in the foreground. That kind of pulls you into the picture plane, and suggesting the loose, smaller rocks. Then for the buildings, we're just going to suggest it very simply up here. Interesting shapes. Keeping it simple. You can draw in your windows if you like this, or you can just suggest them as I did over here. And trees behind the building. There's another house right here with the same kind of interesting dormer situation going on. As you can see, this can be very, very simple. Okay, and big pines. Can you see that? Just making squiggles because, as I say, we are pretending to be in a big hurry here. Only a few moments. I'm going to leave this house out because it doesn't add anything to the composition. That's the wonderful thing about sketching and drawing rather than photography. I could not leave the house out when I was shooting pictures in Maine, but I sure can now. And let's see, more of the smaller rocks here. Alright, that's all I'm going to do for the I'm using my favorite old Prang retrofitted palette here, and I'm going to refresh the paints as usual by giving them a shot of clear water. No need to squeeze out fresh paint every time, unless you just want to. And looks like I need to clean my palette a bit. So, just wiping off the worst of it. I often reuse what's on there. I'm mixing up a sky color. This is partly phthalo blue and partly manganese blue hue these days. You can't actually get manganese anymore, I believe. And I'm painting right over the evergreen trees. The sky's just loose. And I believe I'll paint over these guys too. But leaving the white of the houses as it is. I've panned back a little so that you can see a bit better. And since I had my sky wash mixed up, I'm just going to add a little yellow for the grass into that same blue wash. And I'm going to add a bit of yellow ochre to make it more olivey. It was deep summer when I was there. And move this over here. And again, very quick laying in the grassy areas. And that didn't get quite dry, but I like things to kind of blend a bit, so I'm okay with that. Adding a little bit more of the yellow ochre variation and mixing on the paper is very nice. As I say, we are pretending we have hardly any time as we pass through Maine quickly. And again, one of my favorite mixtures for evergreen trees is a good strong phthalo with burnt sienna, and I'm scaling it back a little bit this time because these trees are in the background and I want them a little bit cooler than I often do. It's still a bit wet, but I'm going to lay these in anyway and let them be soft. Softer than they normally would, and carefully paint around that White House again, as carefully as I can. And again, a little color variation is nice, so I'm picking up a little bit of, oops, not Quin burnt scarlet there, but a little bit of Quin gold. And just letting my brush dance. It's pretty wet because this is a 14 Utrecht brush, so I'm going to come back in and blot a little bit, which gives an interesting texture. Always something that's kind of nice to throw in there. And I shall try to get over here without getting my hand in the wet wash. You can see it's the sky is still damp, so it's spreading softly, and I'm fine with that. Actually, I don't mind that it's spreading into the grass a little bit too. And a little bit of blue variation here and there. Some people just mix completely on their paper, and that makes a nice effect too. It's up to you. Alright, we'll let this dry a bit. I'm going to lay those foreground rocks in now. You can see they'll be rather interesting and a cooler color with some warms mixed in. So, switching to a large flat aquarelle brush here because I like the effect for rocks and such. And I've cleaned away my strong green. And I'm going to mix ultramarine and burnt sienna, maybe a little raw ochre over here, a little bit more blue over here to give myself interesting variations. Okay, and I'm using the side of the brush for part of this for broken lines and to allow a rough look. I want my lines to show through, my ink lines, so I'm not covering every inch. Maybe a little bit of the Quin burnt scarlet down here. This area got more shadow. And strengthening my dark gray here. More shadow down in here and here. A touch here and there. And for these smaller rocks, they seem to be a bit warmer in color, so I'm using a bit more of the burnt sienna. And again, leaving white paper here and there. Some variation. You can again let your brush dance expressively. One thing I really like to do when I am painting rocks and such is to use a little spatter for texture. So I've got my old oil painter's bristle brush here that I've sharpened one end on, as you have seen. And this is just adding a little bit of rocky texture. I'm using a much cleaner blue, gray blue, for the shadows in the house because it's white rather than a gray base. And this is a smaller brush, a low Cornell Ultra Round number 8, that gives me a little bit more control. So I'm going to use cobalt blue for the base blue, and I won't need much, obviously, and just a very small touch of burnt sienna to gray it down a bit. Okay, now looking at the shape of the house, I can see I need a little bit of shadow under here and also on the shaded side. And I'm picking up extra pigment with my damp brush. Again, we have the little shadow here and here and here. My brush got away from me a little bit, so I'm just pushing that back with my finger and then blot it back a bit. Now we'll mix up the color for the dark greenery right here. And now's when I'm going to go for the really heavy duty phthalo blue and burnt sienna. Just about as strong as I can get it. Yeah, that works for me. And again, I'll be using the paper towel for a little bit of definition. Being kind of careful about the shape of my rocks here. I don't want to lose them entirely. And again, using the smaller brush. Just because I want a little bit more control. And if you want, you can use the little bristle brush for detail, like this. Let it provide a little roughness. Does that so well. You can push up or pull down like this. Gives you the impression of the rough plants, whatever the heck this is. And I believe there was a little bit more over here, so I'm just going to tie that in. And then, as I say, come back in here and blot a little bit for tonal variation and a little bit more texture. And let's put the roof on the houses. It's kind of a dark gray. Again, my nice sharp round brush for this. suggest this line, although it really wouldn't show much, but we're doing it anyway, just to make it look more real. And this was a darker building back here, so I'm just going to clip it in and then suggest more of the shadows right here to delineate just a bit better. Let's see. Okay, I'm calling this done.